So, this is for Veritas48. Welcome back. Glad to have you. I am going to just jump right in here. This is in response to Veritas48's challenge. He has two cohorts in this challenge. Dawa Films and Telemontrose. And I have another video for Telemontrose, and I should be making one for Dawa Films in the next couple of days. Yeah, this is a challenge. Particularly, it seems pointed at weak atheism, passive atheism. I have no intention of defending passive atheism. I am a strong atheist, and I'm an agnostic, depending on which God we're talking about here. But I don't really have much room for passive atheism. Sorry to any of my viewers who consider themselves weak atheists, passive atheists, whatever. Anyways, I think there's room for the term weak atheism, but I myself am a positive atheist on most concepts of God. Personally, I think weak atheism is very much akin to agnosticism, if in fact the two terms aren't synonymous. Okay. Arguments for positive atheism. First, absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Sorry. Now, for the duration of this video, I'm going to refer to this phrase simply as the aphorism. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence. It's just too much a tongue twister. Okay, beliefs are simply propositions which are taken to be true. For example, you don't agonize over how to weed the garden for fear of upsetting the gnomes. You simply proceed with the assumption that you're not going to piss off any gnomes. You disbelieve in gnomes. Now, at a deeper, more theoretical level, you may grudgingly accept the possibility that they've simply eluded the notice of mankind and modern science, but as a practical matter, you disbelieve. Now, before I go any further, I want to remind everyone that we are talking about evidence, and if we're talking about evidence, we're talking about induction. And if we're talking about induction, we can never give our conclusions a confidence level of 1. That is, 100% absolute certainty. We can't do that. So what of Veritas' objection? Veritas, you rightly point out that not all beliefs require evidence, as it is conventionally conceived. This is why I so often pair the word evidence with the word reason. Of course reason and evidence are inseparable. Who was it that sincerely made the claim that evidence was the only thing of import? Wasn't me. If we ignore the role of reason, how then do we make use of evidence? Well, this little exercise never really gets off the ground, does it? Without rules of inference, without principles of reasoning with which to make sense of material evidence, of what use can evidence be? I submit that it's of no use. Now, at first blush, I thought this was precisely what you were arguing for. But I don't think it's the case, actually. Because, as I said, of course reason is tacitly and fundamentally entwined around standards of evidence. And yet, when it comes to this skeptic's aphorism about the absence of evidence, you abjectly refuse to engage in any evaluation of this principle or its alternatives. Why not? It isn't quite fair to demand evidence for the proposition that absence of evidence is evidence of absence. For one thing, the phrase speaks of absence and presence, and it's obviously absurd to speak of this principle as having a presence, so it simply doesn't apply to itself. Does it make sense to insist that the scientific method would be more parsimonious without the principle of parsimony? Of course not. What the aphorism refers to is the existence or non-existence of a thing. It doesn't refer directly to the truth of a claim, and it doesn't refer to the practicality of a method or principle at all. We evaluate this principle, a rule of evidence, not with evidence because it's so obviously inappropriate to demand evidence for it, but in terms of its reasonability. The implications of adopting beliefs in the complete absence of evidence or reason becomes increasingly problematic the further you go with it. You're right, of course, when you say that a complete absence of evidence for the existence of God doesn't render atheism true by default. However, this is a straw man of my position, at least, because I choose not to believe a thing which is unsupported by evidence or reason. That's true. This doesn't mean that my disbelief is true, and I don't claim that it is necessarily true as a result of that absence of evidence, and I don't even claim to be terribly confident in my disbelief. However, it certainly seems the most practical choice. I mean, if we didn't demand evidence or reason before holding a belief, how would we ever get through life? I mean, do you have some evidence in a safe somewhere that permits you to go through life with the assumption that you're not going to offend the Aztecan gods? Now, I realize that I'm straying into territory here that you explicitly wanted your responders to avoid. I understand the concern about permitting responders to call upon the disagreement between your faith and Dawa's, for example. But that practical concern of yours does not overrule the relevance of that criticism. I mean, I mentioned the gnomes, you didn't object there. As an atheist, I see the disagreement between a belief in gnomes, your belief in God, and his interpretation of God as Allah as fundamentally the same things. The fact is that you reject views all the time because you feel that they are unjustified, and you don't require positive evidence to the contrary in order to dismiss a proposition. So I have to ask, Why then should I make God an exception to a principle that we all accept most of the time? You cite Kai Nielsen's comment on the possible truth of an unsupported claim, and I think that's fair. I also think it's not terribly relevant. However, what do you prescribe when a position is as yet unsupported? Belief just in case? How will you adjudicate which belief to adopt between two mutually exclusive and unsupported positions? See, this is why I said you abjectly refused to engage in an evaluation of this process. You explicitly said you didn't want to talk about disagreements between beliefs. This problem is precisely the reasonable support I use to justify the standard of evidence in question, the aphorism. If I don't require evidence for beliefs, then I am forced to choose between beliefs arbitrarily, or I will certainly face contradictions in my beliefs. Now, you seem to think that there is some evidence for the existence of God, and I am interested to hear it, or hear what inference from the evidence I've already seen suggests God. But that notwithstanding, it seems that you want to suggest that the complete lack of evidence should have no positive effect on our belief in a proposition of any kind, God or fairies. But just imagine a world in which this view was universally embraced. I think you'll find that it's rationally repugnant. My second justification for positive atheism is best summarized in this way. The law of non-motherfucking contradiction. The law of non-contradiction allows one to hold a positive disbelief in God concepts which are contradictory. Omnipotence in the classical and naive sense is one example of such a contradiction. The problem of evil really is a problem, if you ask me. So much so that it renders meaningless omnipotent and omnibenevolent gods. Those gods which aren't contradictory are swept up by the absence of evidence criticism. So you go on to say that positive atheism faces a problem when it denies all future arguments that may arise or that old arguments may become better founded. And this would be a problem if atheism entailed this, but it doesn't. My positive atheism in no way is a commitment for life. As such, this objection of yours simply falls flat on its face. I invite you to improve the arguments I have seen and judged to be failures, but saying that we're positively denying all future discoveries that might be contrary to our beliefs is simply a gross misrepresentation of most atheists, and I think you know that. Until that time, until you improve those arguments, though, or until new discoveries come to light, I operate under the assumption that all propositions unsupported by evidence or reason are false. That assumption is founded, rational, and accompanied by the honest recognition that this will occasionally mean that I will have been wrong, and I will be required to change from a disbelief in a particular thing to a belief in that particular thing. I mean, if not that, what are you offering? Because it seems to me the criticism is this. If you reject an unfounded, unevidenced belief, then you must provide a foundation or some evidence for that rejection, or your disbelief is itself unfounded. In short, my response to that is, what? This is Godless Eden, signing off.